I think that the situation right now is developing in relations between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the West, and Russia and the rest of the world is quite unusual by any standards, and probably quite unique, at least from 1962 Caribbean crisis. It is very worrisome, and I would like to bring to your attention some facts that I think needs to be paid attention to. I have a number of questions, and I will try to organize my comments here as a kind of Q&A, but it's a very special Q&A. I will ask myself questions. I will try to answer them as well. But after my Q&A, so we will have just a regular Q&A, and just certainly you are very welcome to continue this. But I think the number of questions that I'm going to ask myself, and certainly all of us, are quite known, and they have been raised in the last year and plus quite regularly. So that is why they will be very familiar to you. First one, the question is whether what we're dealing with, so-called Ukrainian crisis, or crisis in Ukraine. As probably you've seen very many times, especially in the Western press and definitely in the Russian press, that is being called Ukrainian crisis or crisis in Ukraine. I think it is deeply incorrect, and this is one of the stunning successes of the Kremlin propaganda, because first of all, it is not crisis, it is war. And now it is not only hybrid war, but it's a real conventional war. And the intensity of this war, especially in the east of Ukraine, is comparable to the intensity of the military operations during the Second World War. Second, in the war there is no one part, there is at least two parts. And here we do see clearly two parts, Russia and Ukraine. So that is why it's definitely a Russian-Ukrainian war, or sometimes the war can be called by the name of the author, main author of this war. That is why we can call this war as Mr. Putin's war against Ukraine. I hope I will, it's not necessary to prove, but I will just demonstrate some facts for this as well. So another question would be necessary to raise is it just a Russian-Ukrainian war, or Mr. Putin's war against Ukraine, or this war goes far beyond Ukraine? From my point of view, it's absolutely clearly yes. This war is definitely much larger by scale. It is lengthier than even this year and 1 month or so that attention of the world public has been attracted to this. It's much broader. It is already a very long war. We can count that preparation for this war took at least 11 years, maybe 14 years, depending which particular act and event we could count at the beginning of the preparation, at least for beginning of mental preparation for such an operation. Yeah? And yet, from at least February 20th year 2014, we have a full-scale conventional war against Ukraine. But the hybrid war against Ukraine started earlier. Unfortunately, we do not have any basis to think that it can be limited to Ukraine, because we're witnessing development of very worrisome events on many other fronts, including Moldova, same Georgia, Belarus, Baltic countries, and some others. Another question is war against not only Ukraine, but against the West. If we would listen to Kremlin propaganda people, it would be they would definitely confirm, yes, this is actually more war against the West rather than war against Ukraine. Ukraine just happened to be here, and because from their point of view, Ukraine, at least the current Ukraine, the modern Ukraine, is an embodiment of the West, so that is why they are forced to deal with Ukraine. But essentially, the main target is the West. Some other more sophisticated propaganda people would distinguish between different parts of the West, some kind of the Anglo-Saxon parts of the West on one side, or the kind of frontline states like Baltic countries and Poland in one camp that present a real threat to Russia or to Kremlin. And another part of the West, like continental Europe, like Germany or France or Spain or some kind of some smaller countries like Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, that from their point of view is a neutral, but in the best case that they hope that could be allied with the Kremlin regime at some point. So here we see that this war against the West, and it is not hide it very much, is not waged, at least at this moment, in conventional weapons, but some other instruments have been used, like bribery, corruption, information and disinformation war of unprecedented level, as we have seen. We have seen also the creation of very interesting new international. Unlike Communist International or Socialist International or Trotsky International, we can see Putin International with the kind of the parties and politicians united from the far right and far left. And especially worrisome element of this new campaign against the Western countries is a nuclear blackmail with new waves, and I will talk about the last wave of this nuclear blackmail as well. Another question is being raised whether it is another Cold War or just some kind of temporary crisis that will fade away reasonably soon. From my point of view, in some regards, what we're seeing right now is worse than the some kind of the old Cold War, traditional Cold War. I would mention some issues that have not been seen during the some kind of the classical Cold War from 1947 to 1991. First of all, this is a conventional warfare of intensity. It's kind of comparable to the World War II in the theater number one in Europe. Second, personal sanctions against the Kremlin leadership. It did not exist during the Cold War. Disinformation war of unprecedented sophistication and intensity. Annexation a part of the European country. That had not been the case from 1945. It is very clear military weakness of Europe. That was not the case during the Cold War. It's a very clear lack of desire to be involved in such action from the United States, which also was not the case during the Cold War. Another very important element of this, that the Western alliance is not very united as it was before. It is very divided on many issues, and especially in its response towards current Kremlin policy. And once again, nuclear blackmail. After Caribbean crisis 1962, it was a kind of mutual agreement by both sides, the Western Alliance and the Eastern Alliance, not to use nuclear blackmail towards each other. And remarkably, both sides tried to some kind of to follow this policy for just altogether it will be for more than 50 years. Some part it was during the Cold War, and some part will be after the Cold War. And now I'm coming to the question that it has been raised many times here in Washington, as well as many Western capitals among analysts, whether war against Ukraine and maybe some other wars that we are witnessing right now, maybe future wars, some kind of byproduct of Putin's spontaneous response to the Euromaidan protest that toppled the Yanukovych regime in Kyiv, or it is the result of the long-term strategic planning. And very often it can be seen that it is kind of common that it was, okay, it's a spontaneous reaction, it's a nervous breakdown, some kind of, it is a kind of reaction, some kind of psychological reaction of Mr. Putin, who was was very much upset what has happened in Maidan. I'll try to some kind of to offer you a little bit lengthy some kind of answer to this question. I think that would be relevant to this particular question and to many other questions that are being discussed right now. I'm not sure they will be able to manage this sophisticated instrument, but I'll try my best. Okay, so first of all, let me just to comment on something that we have seen over the last 23 years in Ukraine. It is one of the most remarkable examples how the country that has been created 23, 24 years ago was driving to the West politically, mentally, psychologically. Just look at this number of maps from 91 to year 2014. This is a result of presidential election in 91, first round, and then just here the kind of three regions in the West were voting for clearly pro-Western orientation. The rest of the country was quite pro-Eastern one, and that is why their candidates collected so many votes. It was in 91. In 94, some kind of the political and some kind of geopolitical orientations have been slightly moved, and Mr. Kravchuk, who has been considered 3 years before as a candidate of the East in the election of 94, was clearly the candidate for the West, and that is why we see that the different regions voted for him, but now very many more regions voted for the Western orientation. In the year 2004 presidential election, this pro-Western orientation moved towards, once again, towards east and towards south. And Ukraine became some kind of a very famous map that kind of has been publicized very widely, some kind of the division of Ukraine from the political perspective. And something similar happened in presidential election of year 2010, Mr. Yanukovych versus Mrs. Tymoshenko and Yushchenko. Nevertheless, you can see the kind of maybe gradually, maybe slowly, but this is a frontier between this kind of Western orientation and Eastern orientation was moving towards the East and towards South. And the kind of the final, the last presidential election of year 2014, when the some kind of pro-Western, but kind of mildly or softly pro-Western candidates and kind of received almost all votes, not all votes, but kind of majority in almost each region of Ukraine. Certainly, it doesn't mean that the people with so-called Eastern political orientation disappeared. They do exist, but kind of they became minority. And also, the result, some kind of the very important fact on this election is the aggression from Russia that actually forced many people to some kind of to move to the West much faster than it would happen otherwise. Nevertheless, we can see how this kind of frontier was moving towards east and towards south. So what kind of response Kremlin prepared for this Ukraine's drive to the West over this period of time? One of them, this is a portrait of Vyacheslav Chornovil, who has been assassinated in a car accident in 1994. He was a person for whom these three pro-Western regions voted in 91, and whose level of support in the 1999 election was about 37% before he has been assassinated. Another element, this is a first Mr. Putin's pilgrimage to the St.Vladimir Cathedral in Chersoneses, which is now Sevastopol. It's an old Greek city on the Black Sea coast. And it is a kind of the place, the location of the so-called baptism of Vladimir I, the Kyiv prince. So in effect, Vladimir Sviatoslavich, the Prince of Kyiv and Rus, has been baptized 2 years before than it is claimed, according to the official Russian legends, either in Kyiv or in Vasilkov near Kyiv. But nevertheless, it was very some kind of important from geopolitical or some other reasons, which we can discuss later, to call that it happened in the current Crimea, in Chersoneses, where this wonderful temple has been built, and Mr. Putin does not miss any opportunity to visit this place when he's in Ukraine and Crimea. So testing war against Ukraine can be attributed to the so-called Tuzla crisis in September, October, year 2003, when the some kind of Russians were trying to build some kind of the land bridge towards this island in the Kerch Sea, in Kerch Strait in the Azov Sea, to claim the part of the Ukrainian territory. The start of the so-called linguistic aggression, linguistic war against Ukraine, is a little bit sophisticated for those who are not familiar with some kind of peculiarities of the Russian language. So you can use a different preposition with the words. Actually, according to the rules of the Russian language, you should use with the name of the country the preposition v or in English. So it's going to will be in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, in Japan, in Ukraine. So the same will be in Russian. В Украине, в Соединенных Штатах, в Великобритании, в Германии, and so on. So if the person is using not preposition in, v, but preposition on, na, it means that this person does not recognize this particular object as a state. It recognizes it only as a geographical place. So that is why it could be territory, but not the state. So that is why if somebody is using the preposition on, it means in kind of voluntary or involuntary, it is a rejection of statehood of this particular territory. So that is why it's a very interesting element, because it's also a reflection of long and not easy history for Ukraine as well. But nevertheless, what is important here, not so much kind of the how different people are using these particular prepositions, but what I would like to attract your attention to, that for the first 4 years and 3 months, Mr. Putin and the presidential administration in Kremlin, in all official documents, I'm saying in all, absolutely in all, 100%, I checked all of them, several thousand documents, they were using a preposition in, which means that they did recognize statehood of Ukraine. And after that, between March 1st and April 5th, year 2004, there was a decision taking in the Kremlin, and all official documents have been switched to use on Ukraine. So, and only few documents, as you can see here, this is kind of little blue columns, demonstrate only those 11 documents that were considering those people who have been appointed in Ukraine before that, like Mr. Chernomyrdin, who was a plenipotentiary ambassador of Russian Federation in Ukraine. So that is why all documents that were relevant to Mr. Chernomyrdin until his term expired were some kind of using the form in Ukraine. But all new people appointed or some kind of what happened with them were using preposition on. So, and the last time this preposition in has been used in one document in year 2010 in July, and since then 100% without any exception they're going to be using the preposition on, which means it's very important, the kind of reflection in this kind of psychology and mentality that those official documents, some kind of in a very soft way, that many people do not recognize and some kind of would not like to accept, because they say, oh, we all our life did speak and did use on Ukraine, so that is why please don't pay much attention to this. No, it's very important because it's a decision has been taken and it's in kind of thoroughly implemented by the presidential administration. So now it is just on Ukraine. What is important, this decision has been taken, this is official decision, has been taken not after revolution of Maidan in February 2014, not after the victory of this revolution, not before that. It was taken not even when the kind of official war, hybrid war against Ukraine has been started on July 27, 2013. This decision has been taken not even after the Orange Revolution. This decision has been taken 7 months before the beginning of the Orange Revolution. So that is why it has nothing common with the behavior of Ukrainians. Either Ukrainian government or Ukrainian society or any Ukrainian Nazi, fascist or whoever. So that is, this decision has been taken long before, and it reflects only personal mindset of those people who were sitting in Kremlin and taking decision in March or April year 2004. How did they see Ukraine, whether Ukraine has statehood or does not? So they decided in year 2004 that Ukraine does not deserve statehood. So another elements and the kind of steps in this war, it's the poisoning of presidential candidate Viktor Yushchenko on September 5th. Mr. Yushchenko before and after poisoning. Another very important element is a discussion at Vnukovo airport on December 2nd, year 2004. It's a very some kind of dramatic exchange of views between Mr. Putin and Mr. Kuchma when Mr. Putin was asking Mr. Kuchma to use military force or some kind of the police force, very brutal force against the Orange Revolution, and Mr. Kuchma declined, having said that you do not understand, Vladimir Vladimirovich, Ukraine has become a different country. So, and it produced a very great disappointment for his colleague. But as a result of that, decision has been taken to work in a different ways. So you can see the kind of the flag of Donetsk People's Republic that became very well known over the last year, but it is not year 2014 or year 2015. It is year 2005 Seliger youth camp. Seliger youth camp is just where the kind of Nashi and all of this kind of pro-Putin youth have been gathered, and that is why it's kind of they some kind of proudly demonstrate this Donetsk People's Republic flag. That time nobody have heard about this organization and all these plans. This is economic element of preparation to the big war. Starting from January year 2006, once again, it's just 1 year after the Orange Revolution, the Russian Central Bank has taken a very serious decision to acquire more and more gold that has absolute liquidity compared to such a kind of non-respected currency like US dollars or euros or any others. So gold can be exchanged on real assets at any circumstances where the country under sanctions or not, whether kind of you have accounts in the international banks or not. So, and once again, this decision has been taken not after Maidan, not before Maidan, not after a Russian-Georgian war. This decision has been taken in January year 2006. As you can see, the kind of accumulation of gold as a foreign exchange reserves from year 2006. Very important element is development of the same kind of the mentality about the kind of restoration empire. Here is one of the most well-known examples of the kind of phantom imperial pains and imperial dreams. 3 documents about the kind of crash of empire and how to restore empire, what kind of empire might be in future, and the kind of analysis, what went wrong, what kind of mistakes have been made with the previous empire, Soviet Empire, or with Byzantium Empire, as Tikhon Shevkunov, a very important person for intellectual some kind of mental development and evolution of Mr. Putin, put in his very famous, or some people would say infamous movie, Гибель империи Византийский Рок, Byzantium Lessons, the crash, collapse of Byzantium Empire, that had been broadcasted on the Russian television. This is a Mikhail Yuriev Third Empire, very influential book, now is recommended to all government apparatus, all governors and local authorities in Russia. And this is an analysis of Mr. Gaidar, collapse of empire, what mistakes have been made and how to avoid those mistakes in future when we're doing something similar. It's necessary to have consultations on empire and imperial issue with the best person who is in charge of this, Mr. Solzhenitsyn. That's a meeting with him on his dacha. It's a very rare, if not unique case when Mr. Putin personally visited someone not in Kremlin but outside Kremlin. And as you can see, very many some kind of elements of Mr. Solzhenitsyn recommendations have been reflected in comments of Mr. Putin later on. Another very important step is a discussion with Mr. Bush during the NATO summit in Bucharest on April 4, year 2008, during which Mr. Putin publicly said that, okay, just be aware that half of Ukraine is ancient Russian lands. And it is some kind of, Mr. Bush listened to these ideas. Okay. This here the leak of the draft of the Operation Clockwork Orange on April 21st, year 2008, that is discussing in details how the military operations in Ukraine against Ukraine should be organized and which particular direction should be used by tank paratrooper divisions by Russia in occupying eastern part of the country. Here, the kind of the beginning, we are coming close to nowadays. This is a Kremlin's alarm, kind of the chercher deux femmes, not la femme, but les femmes, deux femmes. So as you can see here, because it looks like the decision of Madame Merkel to remove obstacles on the way of Ukraine to association with the European Union, regardless whether Mrs. Tymoshenko will be behind bars, and she was put there, as we remember, by Mr. Yanukovych, that actually produced a very serious alarm in Kremlin, because before that it was considered that it's possible to wait because Europe would not accept association of Ukraine with the European Union, but since it happened, so it means that it's necessary to act very quickly and very decisively. So that is why in June year 2013, they began the whole military machine started to work. And a few days on July 5th, year 2013, the decision to launch a really big campaign against Ukraine has been taken. So this is the official announcement of the hybrid war against Ukraine that happened on occasion of the 1025th anniversary of baptism of Rus in Kyiv on July 27th, year 2013. In this speech, Mr. Putin, for the first time, laid down very clear concept of the one people, one nation. So that is why it just only by mistake, by them mistake of history, but just by coincidence, they happen to be living in different, state, different states, but they should live in one state, and that is why this historic injustice should be overcome, and that is why they should be united under the same state roof. It is a very important element because so that was the ideological concept that has been used by the Russian authorities for quite a long period of time, at least for maybe 350 years, for claims for the territories, for the lands that were considered to be the heritage of the so-called Rurikovich's princes. So that is why for some kind of restoration of power of Moscow, not restoration actually, because it was captured, it was initially not the power of Moscow with these territories, but claims for those lands that are known now as the Ukrainian lands and Belarusian lands for at least since the last quarter of 17th century, since maybe mid of 17th century until through all these centuries to 20th century. So it is interesting that this concept has been developed actually not even in Moscow, it has been developed in Kyiv historically. It's interesting. In the Kyiv-Pechersky Abbey in 1674, in the book that became very popular for a couple of centuries in Russia, first of all in the Moscow Principality, after that in Moscow's empire, and after that in the Russian Empire, the book was called Kyiv's Synopsis, in which this concept has been first of all put down and has been developed, and after that the generations of Russian historians and political scientists and philosophers were developing and using this concept. This concept has been taking as the most important weapons by not only Russian imperial government and Russian imperial thinkers, but also during the Russian Civil War in 1917 to 1920-22, such very famous generals like Anton Denikin was using this concept as a flag, as ideological flag, under which the white armies were fighting others, including Bolsheviks and national movements, because they were fighting for united and undivided Russia. This is the concept. It is important to mention because later, already nowadays, from year 2009, Mr. Putin started to pay very particular tribute to Mr. Denikin, to philosopher Ilyin, to writer Solzhenitsyn, who were very harsh advocates of this concept. So that is why it's a very clear, some kind of symbol of embracing by Mr. Putin, the current Kremlin, of this particular concept of one nation, united and undivided. But July 27, year 2013, Kyiv, it was the first time when this concept has been publicly, an official event has been some kind of laid down for the general public. And at the same day, this is official announcement of this concept, this official announcement of necessity to unite Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians under the same state roof. And the same day, Russian government started the Sanitary War against Ukraine. Okay, let me touch some other issues that are not in the presentation, but I think it's still important. The points concerning the development of ideology that is behind these kind of military campaigns. As you know, there was a very intensive discussion is going on underway concerning what lies behind this particular war or the wars that have happened already and might happen in future. And I would say probably we can find and identify at least two main schools of thought. One of them is so-called pragmatic reasons, and another one will be ideological one. In one pragmatic, certainly some different authors would put in different categories, but nevertheless, we could call some of them like this geopolitics, like moving NATO to the borders of Russia, or moving of European Union to borders of Russia. I'm not discussing this concept, but just mentioning what has been used. Another is a necessity to push down domestic opposition, and that is why some kind of mobilize society and some kind of political forces within the country. Another argument is these oil wells or energy wells associated with the high energy prices gave new opportunities, for develop military strengths, political strengths, economic strengths, financial strengths for neighbors, and that is why it would be wrong not to use these new opportunities for acquiring new geopolitical positions. Also, some arguments, now it's maybe not very popular, but nevertheless being mentioned earlier on, some kind of economic reasons, some kind of associated with acquirement of new territories like the kind of Crimea, the kind of this very important, strategically important region, or some kind of industrial regions of Donbass, or some kind of southern Ukraine, or seaports on Black Sea in Ukraine, and so on, or some kind of the pipeline, gas pipeline going through Ukraine, and so on. On the other part, there is another school in that group of factors that have been mentioned. It's ideological ones. And over the last few years, we have seen how different ideas have been tested, both domestically and internationally. Some of them I would mention as well. It is a necessity to compete with so-called democratic liberal regimes in the post-Soviet space. Certainly, the very clear examples would be Georgia and Ukraine. And that is why it's kind of necessity to crush those regimes before they would be attractive enough for the Russian population to follow the case. Some other ideas have been developed over the last few years, like punishment of the decadent West, especially with some kind of multicultural and so on. And that is why a position of Russia and Kremlin would be defense of true European values that have been forgotten and betrayed by the West, this kind of the current West, and that is why Russia would position itself not only as a kind of the deviant power or some kind of revisionist power. No, it would be considered as a kind of the bastion of the true values that is kind of guarding the real values that have been betrayed by others. Also, the claims to Russia's ancestral lands. And very important element, especially in the vocabulary of Mr. Putin, is the call for justice. It's a very important element, one of the most important psychological elements, the call for justice and rule of law in international relations. The argument goes like this. If something is allowed to any subject international relations, and first of all, it would be the United States, so it means that exactly the same should be allowed to Russia. If the United States is being allowed to intervene, let's say, in Afghanistan, so it's also to bomb Afghanistan, that is why it's absolutely allowed for Russia or to Russia to bomb Georgia. If it is possible to some kind of overthrow the government in Libya or in Iraq, so that is why Russia has the same right to overthrow, or at least to try to overthrow the government in Georgia or Ukraine. So if it is possible for the West to proclaim independence of Kosovo, once again, putting aside all these differences, nevertheless. So that is why it's possible, absolutely, Russia has the same right to proclaim independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia and so on. So that is why, and this position, some kind of presented in a rather simplified language, nevertheless, some presented as some kind of call for justice and for equality in the international relations. So we have seen many times when these positions have been presented to the general public, both domestic and international, and we definitely will see them again. I have distributed, you could probably pick up the document that you could find outside, what is called Berchtesgaden and Sochi. I hope you have it. You have it or not? Yeah, I think this is a very important document for analysis of ideology. And seems to me, neither in Russia nor in the West, much attention has been put to this speech, and I think it's one of the most important speeches, probably even more important than the famous some kind of Crimea speech or Novorossiya speech in April last year. This is a speech that has been given by Mr. Putin to the Valdai Club gatherings in Sochi on October 24th last year. Some kind of, it has been called like a Fulton speech by propaganda, some kind of trying to remind about the Winston Churchill speech in Fulton in March 1946. Certainly it is not, because the kind of in content, in the kind of stylistics, and the kind of an environment is a very different one. So Churchill's speech was in defense of freedom, but that's, if you look on this, it's not a speech in defense of freedom, it's in defense of something else. What is it in this speech? I put in comparison two documents, actually it's kind of not two documents, essentially three documents. On one side, two documents that have been dictated by the then Chancellor of the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler, on August 23rd and August 25th, 1939, to Neville Chamberlain, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain. And on the other, in the other column, the Putin so-called Valdai's address or Sochi address on October 24th. And as you can see from these documents, it's pretty remarkable that you could find 25 pieces that very much correspond to each other. Sometimes word by word, sometimes idea by idea, sentence by sentence. It is remarkable. When the kind of the German Chancellor was using Poland, and this has been used Ukraine. Where then it was using some kind of Donetsk corridor, it's clearly some kind of Crimea or Crimean corridor. And some kind of this kind of the persecution of Germans in Poland, here the persecutions of kind of claimed to be persecutions of Russians in Ukraine and so on. You can see here and you can compare it. It seems to me maybe it's a first in English. It's probably have not been published yet, but you can see all these documents. What is important about that? It is important because essentially, if you look, and I would need to make one comment definitely here. Seems to me that neither Mr. Putin himself nor his speechwriters were aware of these two speeches of Mr. Hitler. I seriously doubt that they were aware, because otherwise probably I would expect that we would try to make this comparison not so strongly. It's kind of try to some kind of to make it softer. But it is remarkable that seems to me, once again, I'm kind of saying based on my personal belief that they were not aware about that. It is remarkable how somebody in, seems to me, different circumstances, 75 years later, reproduced almost the same or very similar approach to international relations, and using sometimes very similar and sometimes same sentences and same words than you can see from the text. That's pretty remarkable, and shows that probably we could really witness some similarity in the approaches, in attitudes to situations that on the very first glance look to be rather different. So, but most important in this document, in this speech, is that the content, the suggestion that has been given by Hitler to Chamberlain. He proposed to Chamberlain to divide Europe. He was saying that, okay, so we probably not extremely happy with everything that British Empire is doing, but we respect you and we respect your interest, and we respect your interest in some other parts of the world. Sometimes we do not like it much, but we understand you are a very powerful country, and so that is why we are ready to deal with it. But we respect your interest in your parts of the world. Please respect our interest in our part of the world. Let's have a deal. It's an offer of grand bargain to Great Britain. So it is interesting that exactly the same time, a very similar message has been sent to not only to the West but to the East, to Joseph Stalin. And Mr. Johann Ribbentrop flew to Moscow on the same day, August 23rd, 1939, with a similar offer: let's divide Eastern Europe. And as we know from history, the offer that has been sent to Mr. Stalin by Hitler has been accepted. And as a result of this was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of division of Eastern and Central Europe. Mr. Chamberlain did not accept the offer proposed to him by Hitler, and 8 days later, there was the beginning of the Second World War. So what Mr. Putin is proposing in the October 24th speech, he's proposing something similar. He is saying the United States is a very powerful country. We do recognize that the United States are very particular interest in different parts of the world. We do not always like those interests, and we do not always like actions of the United States in all these parts of the world, but we respect them. But please do respect our own interest in our part of the world, or as it is being put in the language of the concept of foreign policy that have been approved in Kremlin in July 2008, in our sphere of privileged interests. And that is the most important idea that has been put in this speech, as well as many other documents. It was exactly that Mr. Putin was going to talk about during his Beijing meeting with Mr. Obama in November 2014. But whether Mr. Obama understood it or not is not clear. There was no real conversation, and Mr. Putin publicly was saying that he was very much upset about that. He was very much hoped that he could speak about this at G20 meeting in Brisbane. Mr. Obama decided not to meet with Putin, and that is why this opportunity has been missed. Mr. Putin flew back to Moscow, preparing for much more convincing arguments for Mr. Obama to reconsider his offer of grand bargain. And I'm skipping a lot of that. At some point, maybe we'll have it. We'll see whether we'll. But we are moving to probably to one of the last slides in the presentation. It is preparation. All right. Okay. Just let's keep very, very fast. Thank you very much for restoration, at least of course, not ancestral lens, but at least representation. So this is the start of the Sanitary War. Mr. Yushchenko, very famous chief sanitary doctor of Russia, studied the Sanitary War against Ukrainian chocolate presented here in Roshen from Mr. Poroshenko factory. So it has been banned. That time, after that, all this ban has been removed, and Poroshenko chocolate is very welcome in Russia, as you know, right now, but that was the beginning of the war. So here the Putin blackmails Mr. Yanukovych on November 9th on the Russian military base. Okay, if you move to EU, I'll take Crimea and Novorossiya. It's a deal. So Mr. Yanukovych is not very much impressed by this offer. So this is a Security Council, Russia's Security Council plan for the 11 regions of Novorossiya, some kind of prepared around mid-January year 2014. Here, the start of conventional war against Ukraine on February 20th. This is a medal for return of Crimea, a very clear date of the beginning military operations, February 20th, 3 days before removal of some kind of the run of Mr. Yanukovych from Kyiv and from Ukraine. Here, the military intervention blackmail with the decision of the Federation Council, Mr. Putin's rhetoric, some kind of that would facilitate much operations against Novorossiya. Here, the just comparison of the support for Anschluss by Crimean population for 4 years before that. As you can see, it was between 23 and 53% in the worst case in year 2011, but usually it's 25, 31 to 41%. And after that, when this occupandum, as has been mentioned by journalists, produced results of 80% all of a sudden. Here's the triumph of Crimea on March 18th, Mr. Putin's speech. Here, the Mr. Putin / Mr. Zhirinovsky plan for division of Ukraine revealed on March 23, year 2014, along with the Novorossiya given to Russia. Some territories of Ukraine are offered to Poland, some to Hungary, some to Romania. Some kind of, it's very similar as had been offered and done in 1939 with Czechoslovakia by Hitler. This is kind of the Putin's Novorossiya dream plan revealed on April 17th with 8 regions of Novorossiya. Here the kind of Novorossiya in the making, so it just was not everything went so well as it was proposed. So it's even worse when there was a military operation started. As you can see, how the Donbass front changed from the beginning. That was the beginning. After that, it was a shrinking until Russian troops started to intervene at full scale. So this is the start of the terrorist war, the dawning of MH17 by Russian book on July 17, year 2014. This is an economic preparation for a really big war. As you can see, for the long period of time, from year 2000 to year 2013, Russian military expenditures were at level 2.5 to 3.2 percentage points of GDP. The beginning of the Crimea occupation and the Novorossiya operation, they jumped to 6.7% of GDP. Nevertheless, after May year 2014, when it became some kind of, the decision has been taken to either cancel or to postpone the full-scale operation. So military spending went down to 4.1%. But from January year 2015, the last couple of months, we have unprecedented high level of military expenditures, up close to 13% of GDP. This is a real serious military expenditures. Never been seen since some kind of independent Russia, but actually even in the last couple of decades of the Soviet Union, it never reached this level. So what kind of NATO response or West response to the Kremlin aggression? We can see this is a kind of the last word of, we have seen 3 armored vehicles in Narva, Estonia, on February 24th. That seems to me, hopefully not everything that NATO has at this moment. Okay, but at least we see that there is some response. Okay, and this is the Russian tanks on March. Here, Kremlin response to NATO response is very clear, and it has been delivered in the kind of recent meetings of the intelligence representatives. 3 lessons, as they say. First, don't touch Crimea, don't send weapons to Ukraine. And by the way, Baltics are ours as well, just if you forgot. Okay, so the latest wave of nuclear blackmail, if you missed it, I would strongly recommend to read these bizarre statements about just not only some kind of using nuclear forces against the whatever American cities or some kind of American military, some kind of resources, but here they found something very interesting. I'm not a geologist. I don't have nothing, have no idea. But the idea is just to attack Yellowstone, sleeping or half sleeping super hyper volcano, or California St. Andreas Fault, and according to this logic, it should some kind of start and trigger the huge geotectonical process that would sweep away the United States from the face of Earth. Quotation, it's not my words, as you can imagine. So, but it's a kind of, I was thinking whether should I use it or not, because usually U.S. audience is not very much ready for such a stuff. But I decided to do it because you need to to have at least a glimpse of evolution of so-called kind of public debate, or whatever. I would not say debate, but public presentation back in Russia, to what extent it became really some kind of irrational in this idea, and as it means, rather dangerous. And this is this nuclear blackmail phantom dreams. That's exactly what's going to happen with New York and Liberty State. Especially Liberty State is very important because it's a clash of values, as you still remember. So, but before it happened, because it's in New York, it's necessary to have a important speech in New York at the General Assembly of the United Nations, and that is why it has been announced that Mr. Putin is going to United Nations in September this year to deliver a speech. And we can actually have some ideas of what kind of speech might be. Some of them we discussed on the basis of this October 24th Sochi/Valdai speech. It's a kind of the both offer of grand bargain, and it's the same. It's a kind of the call to the United States and to the West to divide something, and also claim for justice or some kind of rule of law, international relations, and some kind of creation of new international system in which if everything is allowed to one subject, it's exactly the same should be allowed to another subject. At least if this another subject is Kremlin's Russia.
You make a very good case for the preparation long in advance for Mr. Putin's aggression in Ukraine. Where do you think he's going next? What is his next move? In Ukraine, beyond Ukraine?
And I try to demonstrate here in the presentation, also in my oral comments. I think this is the most important. It's a big game, and the big game actually includes elements on the ground with attempts to convince the other side to come to the table for negotiations for this grand bargain. So, and as long as the other side does not come to the table for negotiations, so the stakes on the ground might be and probably will be raised with the movement in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Belarus, in Baltics. At the first, first level, first turn of move. But if there will be no sufficient response, or there will be no response at all, so those stakes will be raised again and again and again. That's the logic of this game. As long as no response or response is considered to be not sufficient enough are not satisfactory enough, those stakes will be raised.
All right, I'll ask one more question. What if he faces serious counter-pressure, which so far he has not faced?
What would you consider serious counter-pressure?
Well,
Just give me an example.
Well, you talked about one of his messages, no weapons for Ukraine. What if sanctions were stronger? What if weapons were supplied to Ukraine? What if more deployments went into the Baltic states as NATO allies?
Okay. I know there is a big debate goes about the sanctions. From my point of view, it is barely seen from Russia. Just at least they kind of, for those few people who are there under sanctions, yes, it is rather painful. For macroeconomic situation, it is almost insignificant. For political pressure, they do not exist at all. So that is why it's not a response. They just don't see that. So delivery of weapons, regardless of what kind of rhetorics have been put to it, it's not something that can stop it. I think kind of the deployment of even 100 US troops or NATO troops to Estonia, so with 3 armored vehicles, in addition to 5,000 Estonian military personnel, it's not something that can produce enough impression. And it has been very clearly mentioned in this so-called response of intelligence community in the meeting recently in Europe, that it just doesn't bother us at all. So that is why it's not a so-called serious response. That's kind of response that causes laughing. Sorry, but just for this expression, but that's a fact of life.
Okay, thank you.
So that is why it's not yet serious response, and which reflects, it's a very important element. It reflects the situation here in the United States, in Washington, the West, kind of just the underestimation or clearly misunderstanding what is going on, and misunderstanding of the position taken by counterpartner and his plans and his wishes and his desires and his offers.
Okay,
which actually makes him even more upset.
Right here. Then 2 and then 3.
Thank you very much. I'm Elaine Serrao. I'm the Executive Director of Fate Squared. I really appreciate everything that you've presented, even with the hiccup with the slides.
It's especially organized, as you
It worked. You carried through. Don't worry about it. What I am concerned with is just the picture you have painted. It's really very clear. It's obvious this has been well planned out. Mr. Putin's Kremlin has been very, very adept at actually using our own dialogue that we have used for many, many years and using it well in his own voice, taking other voices from history, even unbeknownst to him, you're still using the same voice. And what we're seeing now is, where will this go? Because military, well, you've pointed out that may have little effect. Other kinds of threats, I don't know that he would be a person not to deliver on his threats. He's a different type of individual. And so what would you suggest, given your analysis, which is obviously very deep, what would you suggest would be our move before the aspiration speech in September 2013?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I would say that Mr. Putin is not such a person who does not deliver.
That's not saying
He does deliver. With few exceptions, usually he does deliver. And it's kind of, he's kind of demonstrated many times that he is able to deliver in a very serious circumstances. So that is why I have almost no doubts that if there will be no response, or will be no adequate response, no serious response, so he will deliver. So we definitely don't know yet what exactly, where exactly, when exactly. But we're absolutely sure that he will try to deliver and to make his case serious and some kind of very strong. one of the very clear areas of his attention is the so-called sphere of privileged interests. Regardless how it is being called for different audience, whether it's a Ruski Mir or a Eurasian Union or some kind of Russian civilization, or doesn't matter. So it will be sphere of privileged interest. What we definitely don't know yet, we don't know borders of this sphere of privileged interest. And all attempts to some kind of find out what are the borders of this sphere of privileged interest did not produce any good results. We certainly can claim that it is at least the territory of the former Soviet Union. And many remarks concerning it very clear that this area in which some of the United States, NATO, European Union, the West should be involved. It's very clear. But it's clearly that sphere of privileged interest goes beyond former Soviet Union. Number of remarks made by Mr. Putin, by Medvedev, by some other people. So, but we don't know yet. So that is why, as long as there is no response, there will be some kind of actions confirming the kind of these property rights, if I may use this particular terminology, for the sphere of privileged interest in this regard. So as for possible counter actions, I would say just there is at least three elements. The first of all, understanding what's going on, which is clearly lacking here and in many other places. Second, development of real strategy. Not some kind of the reaction steps like let's have a sanctions, and after that even sanctions some kind of introduced after the first quarter, year 2014, after then play, oh look at this, in the first quarter of year 2014 the capital flight from Russia some kind of was $70 billion US. That's a result of our sanctions. But everybody look at the numbers, okay, come on. You have introduced your sanctions after the first quarter. How it is possible these sanctions could affect the result of this first quarter? Okay, but just people do not kind of pay attention to what they are saying. So that is why, once again, it should be something really serious. It's not only some kind of reactionary move. It would be some kind of very serious strategy, would include many, many instruments that actually are in hands of the governments, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and some other ministries, and that are not being even discussed yet, not even just kind of implemented. So that is why. And third element is will, political will to implement and to continue to implement those measures in the strategy. So far, we're very far from this particular third stage. So, and we have, as we all know, very serious problems with political will. Even it's very modest, some kind of examples, much more modest examples than this one.
If Putin's objective is to get agreement to his grand bargain, what, in your opinion, are the pros and cons of our accepting that grand bargain?
Embargo?
Grand bargain.
A grand bargain. Okay. All right. It's a good idea. It's actually a good option. So I had an element here in my speech, but thank you very much for this question. So just what possible options for the West, whatever, or United States exist in this regard? So first of all, is just one of them is just to accept a grand bargain. So it would be a very good option. It would be very similar to the move that Joseph Stalin made on August 23rd, year 1939. So it would be another edition of pact, which probably would have slightly different names, but essentially would be the same. So it will be division of Europe or world, some kind of division of spheres of privileged interest.
Russian interest in Eastern Europe, so-called, and also mentioned about history of injustice. I want to shift to Central Asia. You know, they also have those interests, privileged interests, and there's many Russian speakers and Russians that live. So what should happen in those Central Asia and Kazakhstan specifically that Russia will start another big war?
So that's a big area, and certainly if same principles exist, so they should be applied to any territory. So I relatively not worrying about the situation in Central Asia and Kazakhstan until as long as Mr. Nazarbayev is alive and healthy.
Dr. Ilarionov, you've mentioned that Putin's next steps will be into Ukraine. You predicted it'll be into Ukraine, Eastern Europe, the Balts, etc. But he's also very actively pushing a campaign of aggressive hegemonic expansion in all parts of the world, in South America, Africa, Asia, etc. And he's doing it in lots of different ways. He's through propaganda, through attempts to suborn governments, through corruption, buying off leaders, securing assets, making grandiose asset purchases in Nigeria, working on them in Northern Africa. He's creating dependencies. He's a very busy person. All of this takes a lot of resources. It takes money, it takes organization, it takes people, it takes political support, it takes allies, etc., resources. What is your view as to his ability to pull together all the resources to succeed in this grandiose offensive that he's carrying out, that he's pushing worldwide, particularly financing, as well as the other elements, like suborning other governments, creating allies, marshaling all the other resources necessary to succeed? Do you think he'll be able to do that? Or will this result to his bankrupting Russia? And could this possibly lead to a breakup of Russia?
Let me reformulate your question from the issue of absolute amount of resources to the issue of effectiveness of use of resources. I'm by training economist, so we are being taught to talk about not only about total amount of resources, but how to use resources. And please just look at the real picture that we can see right now. If you compare the Russian GDP and let's say European GDP, it will be some kind of comparison, like, if I'm not mistaken, some kind of 8-1. If we add the United States and Europe, it will be altogether probably 16-1 in purchasing power parities, because in real exchange rate it will be even larger distance. If we look into the military expenditure, just some kind of the total cumulative military expenditure of NATO versus Russia, the ratio would be probably saying 16 or maybe 20-1. And in many other regards, it would be very striking contrast between resources available in the West and under command of the West, or whatever you would define, NATO, the EU, overall, whatever, in Russia, which is much, much smaller, which makes many people to think, okay, that's nothing to talk about, because it's very clear that the potential are so different. So that is why we should not worry about this, just forget about this. It will fade away, or some kind of resources will finish at some point when oil prices will collapse or whatever. But if you look what has been achieved over the last few years with these much smaller resources in the country, in the neighboring countries, and even in the West, and you mentioned some of these cases, and we can continue this, and we would see that, yes, total amount of resources is a very important factor. But there is something important as well, is the effectiveness of use of resources and political will to do something. We know from the history that sometimes the result and the outcome of the battle depends not only on amount of resources and the command of the competing factions, but how some kind of decisive, ready, some kind of one of the sides, even at the smaller sides, if it has much smaller resources, and much more aggressive behavior of the person, of the party, of the faction, of the army, with the smaller resources, but much more aggressive behavior, sometimes brings victory. So that is why we are dealing, sorry, it's maybe not very politically correct comparison, but nevertheless, it's a kind of the old proverb about this kind of some kind of crowd of lions led by sheep and the kind of crowd of sheep led by lion. So that who would win in that battle? There is no ready, easy, and simple answer, but the history gives us different examples, and the kind of the huge resources without clear political will, some kind of bright brain, and the kind of ability to use those resources would definitely bring defeat, as we have seen many times in history.
My question is related to, you spoke about the pragmatic reasons and the ideological reasons behind the thing. Now, given the current state of Russian economy, which is affected by the fall of the oil prices, and it is up to a certain extent affected by the sanctions imposed both by the EU and the US. What would you say that is more prevalent in President Putin's view? The pragmatic reasons or the ideological reasons? Thank you.
All right, we put aside the discussion about the economic situation in Russia because it's a great discussion that will never be ended. Okay, so but just about this, certainly it's kind of the topic of also different views with different arguments and counter-arguments. And essentially, certainly, in reality, it seems to me, both of them do exist in the mindset of such a very well-trained and prepared person like Mr. Putin. At the same time, I would like to attract your attention as well, attention of everybody, to the importance of these ideological factors. It does not mean that pragmatic reasons do not exist. They do exist. But it seems to me this ideology, this particular mindset, did play and does play a very important role. As we have seen, very many elements of what have been developed later in the kind of full-scale war started when there was no element for this pragmatic explanation did not exist. So it was a very early stage. And we know that, for example, the war in Ukraine or against Ukraine last year in year 2014 cost Russia, it's coming back to this economic cost, at least to 23 billion US dollars. This is that not very many people mention, but this is a loss of foreign exchange reserve as a clear, direct result, not of sanctions. No. It's sanctions almost did not affect this because as a result of sanctions, some assets have been returned to Russia, not some kind of going out. But this is a loss because of the war. So there's a huge resources, and that's a kind of 2.5 times more than these Sochi Olympics and many other expenses and so on. And Mr. Putin some kind of voluntarily went for some kind of losing those reserves that had been accumulated many years before. Now he's kind of spending about 10 billion US dollars a month on military expenditure. He's going to spend even more. So, but just which looks like from the point of view of the some kind of rational person, very strangely. Nevertheless, it's a reflection of particular ideology, particular values, regardless whether we agree or not. But this is a point of view, and particular some kind of the vision of the world. So that is why we definitely should not underestimate this particular ideological component.
We've got 5 minutes, and we've got a bunch of hands up. We'll take several questions, then we'll have Andrei answer them all seriatim. Nadia, you're next. Come over here.
Well, Nadia Makano, U.S. Ukraine Foundation. Just a quick comment about effective use of resources. In '88, we were successful because of a 2-year lobbying PR campaign to deny Moscow the celebration, because we had legislation that said no use official should go unless the Ukrainian Catholic Church was legalized. Question, though. The assassination of Boris Nemtsov, is it just going to be a little tiny blip in the history of events occurring in Russia, or is it going to have some kind of impact because of the work that he was doing to expose the cost to Russia of the war in Ukraine?
Radim Dragomaka, University of St. Andrews. It seems to me that there's a great deal of naivete about the fact that the eastern regions of Ukraine under separatist control are de facto lost, and that there isn't either the will or the means to reclaim them back, just like Crimea. My question to you then is, if that's the premise, and if you accept that premise, is there anything short of accepting the grand bargain or offering the rest of Ukraine the umbrella of NATO that would prevent that front from moving further west?
Lost for whom?
across to the west or to the Ukraine?
You mean for Ukraine?
Yes.
You mean the very edge of eastern Ukraine, because East Ukraine is huge. You
Yes.
meaning the kind of these Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic.
Yes.
Ostapanonis with the Lithuanian American community. You've presented an effective argument that Putin has prepared himself for war, but has he actually prepared the people of Russia for this war? And the question results from the fact that there are commentators talking about the extreme efforts of Putin's government to hide the losses, the body bags coming back to Russia. And if the people of Russia are not prepared to have their army die in Ukraine and other parts of Europe, then it's just Putin's personal army that he's sending there, correct?
You're a great one for making prognoses, Mr. Illarionov. So could you please talk a little bit about a post-Putin Russia? Such a thing will exist, and it will come to pass, hopefully sooner than later.
The most important question here is definitely not who physically was involved in that, but who gave the order. That's the most interesting. And frankly speaking, the number of the suspects are very limited. Actually, they just at the most, no, it's most 3, but 2 of them are very unlikely. So that is why is clearly the kind of the participation of government structures and government bodies and government ministries, including FSO, the kind of the federal guard organization, the kind of this in charge of personal security, personal safety of Mr. Putin, because this is very clearly the area of its direct responsibility. It is impossible to have this assassination without clear, very close involvement of this organization into assassination of Boris Nemtsov. As for the impact of that, was pretty dramatic, very serious, and that changed, seems to me, very substantially the mood in Moscow and in Russia. Many people claim that Boris Nemtsov is not some kind of popular, is not some kind of somebody who could be elected. It is too partially true, at least in the last few years. Nevertheless, that has made very substantial changes in the public attitude and public feelings in Russia. I would not make any comparison, but to my mind, it is to some extent might be comparable with the assassination of Jerzy Popieluszka in Poland in 1984, if I'm not mistaken, by 2 agents of the political police of Poland. But the difference between Jerzy Popieluszka case and Boris Nemtsov, that we know that Jerzy Popieluszka has been killed by this political police, but not by the order of Jaruzelski, Wojciech Jaruzelski, and that is why President Jaruzelski has ordered investigation as objective as possible, and those people have been found and have been sentenced to, and they have been put in jail. And that's the difference with Russia. As for East Ukraine, it's kind of very, very East Ukraine. Our proposals together with Andrei Pienkovsky was to pronounce these territories temporarily occupied and withdraw all Ukrainian institutions from this territory until those territories will be vacated by the Russian troops and their proxies. So as a temporal solution to the situation. How long it continues, I cannot predict. I think at some point it would happen, especially when will be fulfilled the most important conditions for solution of all these problems, meaning the arrival of democratic Russia. As soon as Russia will become democratic, this particular question will be, it's not a kind of insignificant question, but it can be resolved relatively easily, along with some other questions and issues. Preparations of Russian people towards war, it is going very seriously. First of all, psychological, information or disinformation one, and we have seen and witnessed unbelievable changes and shifts in the public attitudes. And the some kind of the intensity of psychological warfare against the Russian population is probably unseen even historically. Even those people of some kind of very serious age who do remember Stalinist time, they say that from the point of view psychological and disinformation war, it is incomparable to what they still remember from 1930s and 1940s and 1950s. So we certainly cannot judge, but it looks like that we are dealing with something that we never dealt before by the level. And we have seen it not only in Russia, but in some other neighboring countries, in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, in Western Europe, even in the United States. So that is why we still do not understand the full strength of particular disinformation campaigns and psychological warfare. So that is why, regardless of losses that definitely have been hid by the Russian authorities, the ability of the society to have these losses seems to me still very far from the edge. During the two Chechen wars, Russia lost tens of thousands military personnel. It did not produce any substantial result on Russian society. Then Russian society was much more liberal, much more democratic, much more open. So that is why I would be rather cautious to make any predictions based on the real or some kind of created connection between the number of losses and ability of society to withstand that pressure. Unfortunately, we have seen in the past, even in recent past, that this reserve could be rather serious one. And my last point is about the post-Putin Russia. This is probably the most important element in that strategy that we just mentioned but did not discuss yet, and I think it's necessary to devote not a session, and certainly maybe not a session, but many sessions to discussing what should be and what might be, what must be components of the successful strategy against the aggressor, against this war. The crucial element in any of those strategies should be liberal, democratic, free Russia. As long as Russia is an unfree country, it would pose threat to its neighbors, to the West, to its own people. Only this solution, only arrival of free, liberal, democratic Russia, according to all this principle of civilized, democratic society that exists in many parts of the world, not only in the West, that would solve most of these problems. So that is why these components should be included in all the strategy, and this kind of long-term and strategic approach should include that sooner or later, not to just introduce this sanction or the other sanction, to have SWIFT or not SWIFT. We should think how to make Russia free and democratic country. If we move to that target, so we can achieve, and we shall stop aggressor. And we have a peace and freedom in Europe, definitely. Thank you.